start, let me do my formal intro. We'll make this all professional. People strap in because Glenn's worked up. Here we go. And welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show, also known as the Dean's Report Live. And joining me now, my buddy who comes on every 2 weeks, Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army in JAG Corps. His Justice Matters for Glenn Kirschner has 1.1 million followers on YouTube. And his Substack, you must sign up for it, glennkirschner.com. It's very, very popular. Glenn, good to see you. There was some breaking news right before we started, but good to have you on, my friend.
Hey, great to be with you, Dean. Yeah, you want to introduce the breaking news, or you want me to?
I'll just set up a little bit, and then you'll make sense of it for us. People haven't seen it. 2 DOJ prosecutors, according to reporting by ABC and Politico, were put on leave because in a sentencing memo in a case with a guy who was a January 6th terrorist who had been pardoned, they described the January 6th terrorist attack the way it was, a terrorist attack. And somehow now they are getting, 2 of them are put on leave for doing this, which doesn't make sense to us. So please, Glenn, explain what is going on.
So, Dean, first of all, I may be good, but I can't explain the inexplicable, but I will take the viewers through what the heck we just learned. So that was my office for decades, the office that I worked in, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. So I take it personally when they are putting people on administrative leave, which is almost a pretty way of saying y'all are fired. And they took their phones, they locked them out of their computers. So it doesn't sound like they're going to be invited back to work, right? Here's what they did. They prosecuted somebody who had been one of the January 6th defendants. He was convicted. He was sentenced. Donald Trump pardoned him. The problem is he continued to do crime, right? So some of what he did was he was making all of these outlandish death threats against former President Obama. And he said, I am going to drive my van, which is basically a rolling bomb with a detonator in it. I'm going to drive it to Obama's house and I'm going to blow it up. I'm taking liberties with exactly what he was convicted of saying and doing. And so what happens is, this gets me going. Do you remember, Dean, when Donald Trump posted President Obama's home address? Do you remember
something like that? I do. That rings a bell now.
We were so outraged at the time because he was endangering a former president of the United States, because we all know what his, most rabid supporters will do with somebody when he sends out the missive that I don't like this guy. And by the way, here's his address. That's not what he said, but that is always the message that Donald Trump is looking to deliver to his supporters, right? So this guy, the next day, this defendant's name, I've got the legal pleading here, is Taylor Franklin Toronto. This guy says, I'm headed to Obama's house. And he drives his van there. He gets out. Secret Service, fortunately, sort of grabs hold of him. He's got weapons. He's got hundreds of rounds of ammunition in the van. It turns out that the van didn't have a bomb in it, but he was posting, including live streaming, about what he was doing minute to minute. And he was prosecuted and he was convicted of a whole rack of crimes. And then the federal prosecutors did exactly what I had done hundreds of times. In advance of the sentencing date, I filed a memorandum in aid of sentencing, laying out for the judge who this defendant is, what he did, what his criminal history is, and asking for a particular sentence. And there are 2 things in here that we suspect might have led to these 2 federal prosecutors who signed this memorandum being essentially fired, right? Marched out, locked out of their computers and their phones. One sentence says, on January 6, 2021, thousands of people compromising a mob of rioters attacked the U.S. Capitol while a joint session of Congress met to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election. Toronto was accused of participating in the riot in Washington, D.C. by entering the U.S. Capitol building. Okay, that's all factual and accurate. It's not even hyperbole. That's exactly what happened. But then there's a second sentence that caught my attention, and this may be what got these people fired, unlawfully fired, mind you. They say, On June 29th, 2023, then former President Donald Trump published on a social media platform, the purported address of former President Barack Obama. The defendant, Toronto, reposted the address on the same platform and thereafter started live streaming from his van on his YouTube channel. Toronto broadcast footage of himself as he drove through the Kalorama neighborhood, where Barack Obama lived in Washington, D.C., claiming he was searching for tunnels he believed would provide him access to the private residences of certain high-profile individuals, including President Obama. He parked his van, walked away from it, approached a restricted area protected by U.S. Secret Service. He walked through the nearby woods and stated, "Gotta get a shot. Stop at nothing to get the shot." After noticing the presence of the Secret Service, he added, "If I were them, I'd be watching this, watching my every move." And he goes on to describe what he was involved in, all of which was criminal at the time. Here's all I can think of, Dean. Either Donald Trump, dear leader, was so enraged that these prosecutors put in there that an angry mob attacked the Capitol on January 6th and Toronto was among them, or references the fact, which I had forgotten, that we forget more of Donald Trump's outrageous conduct than we can even remember, that Donald Trump posted Obama's address, which enabled this guy, Toronto, to go try to do harm. That's all I can think of.
I think it's the second one. I mean, I think the first one may have gotten some red flags, but you work in DOJ. But think about it. In a pleading by Trump's own regime, someone cited Donald Trump as one of the reasons a terrorist threat was made against the former president. And I think that's probably the two of them. The January 6th thing alone, maybe, maybe not. But invoking Trump, that he was a part of this crime, I think, what do you think in your heart?
I think that's what angered dear leader. And I don't know if he was the one who spotted this or somebody brought it to his attention. It was probably Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche at the Department of Justice. And here's the thing, Dean. Jeanine Pirro is the U.S. attorney for these two prosecutors. She's supposed to have their back. If I know anything about leadership, about supervising people, I learned it back in the Army in the 80s. There are 3 rules of leadership: support your people, and support your people. And the fact that Jeanine Pirro would retaliate against her own prosecutors that she is supposed to be leading and have them marched out because they spoke the truth in a pleading to a federal judge. And Dean, the judge needs to know this because the judge has to make an informed decision about what the right sentence is. Frankly, if they left out important facts, they could be called to the carpet ethically for hiding stuff from the judge. I mean, it's just so outrageous. And the fact that it's my former office that is treating people like this and endangering the public is just beyond despicable.
From your point of view, what's the message that DOJ is sending by suspending these 2 federal prosecutors very publicly, to be blunt? What do you think the message is?
Don't include any truthful, accurate information in your day-to-day work as prosecutors if it could make dear leader look bad in any way. It's clear that before these first of all, these prosecutors didn't just file this on a whim. It would have went up through their supervisory chain for approval. So I don't know who else, may suffer the same consequences. But apparently they didn't run it by the Ministry of Truth to make sure it was scrubbed of all facts that could upset dear leader. George Orwell would blush at what the hell's going on in our little, corner of hell, 1984, Donald Trump style.
Well, it's interesting. Donald Trump's on a plane in Asia talking about cognitive tests and telling us about the exams that he's gotten that nobody knew about, like the MRI. He's not reading briefs. He doesn't read anything. I don't know if his brain that's mush now can actually read any longer. But somebody in DOJ read it and got upset. And it reminds me of when I used to do comedy, and I produced a comedy festival in Jordan, the country of Jordan. And we were told you can't make fun of King Abdullah, right? That was the thing. And then we met the king. He goes, you can make fun of me. I don't care. It's the people around the king that were more about like, oh, we can't allow this to happen because they know in their view, in the case of King Abdullah, who's like half British guy, half Arab guy, he was like, I don't, he has a sense of humor. He appeared on Star Trek. I'm not even kidding when he was a prince. Like, so, but it was the people around him that said, no, you can't do this. I wonder if the same dynamics here. Trump didn't hear about this. He doesn't know about this. But they're like, no, you must have the absolute leader, loyalty to our supreme leader. Here's the picture in every office. Every day we must go bow to him. We're going to build a little vigil to him every day. And if that is part of it, what's really going on, the demanding loyalty and allegiance to everyone who works there from top to bottom, or you're gone.
It is the destruction of the rule of law. It is the destruction of the legitimacy of the Department of Justice by Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, and anybody else who is willing to abandon their ethics, abandon the oath that they all took. Even I took this oath as a member of the military, but I took it again when I joined the Department of Justice. We pledge our loyalty to the Constitution, and we promise to protect it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we now have domestic enemies of the Constitution firmly entrenched, certainly at the Department of Justice, and I would argue across all executive branch agencies. And if you forget that oath of loyalty that you took, then you need to self-select and get out of the business. I would rather stand up to the lawlessness of a Bondi and Blanche and get wrongfully terminated. And now we'll see if these two former prosecutors, assuming they're permanently fired, will choose to speak out about what they saw going on inside the Department of Justice.
They'll have their own Substack by tomorrow. They'll be doing Substack lives tomorrow, and everyone will be watching. Who's watching now will be watching then, which is fine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying in any kind of mocking way. I mentioned to you, and we won't go into detail because I literally read the indictment very quickly before we started, but it's more of the alarm of the time we're living through. Kat Abou-Ghazaleh, who Glenn has interviewed, and I know her, we're both Palestinian American, and she's been demonized by Laura Loomer a lot online for being Palestinian American. She's running for Congress in Chicago. She was just indicted, and it's not just her. I saw that caption. It was 4 or 5 people. They protest peacefully outside of the Broadview ICE facility outside of Chicago every day. I've talked to her on my show a couple of times about it. Once, she literally was caught on video where she's standing there, and an ICE agent picks her up. She's like 5'1" and throws her to the ground. Yeah. She's 26. And now she's the one indicted. And she, of course, is saying what it seems to be. It's to silence political dissent in this country. And without even going to the facts of the indictment, this is consistent, Glenn, is it not, what we're living through? This administration will use DOJ to silence critics. And people have to get how dangerous this administration, this regime is to all of our freedoms going forward.
Dean, it's open season for vindictive prosecutions against anybody that has the nerve to stand up to the lawlessness, the unconstitutionality of the Trump administration. I saw that video several times of them throwing Kat to the ground. To this old career prosecutor, that looked a lot like an assault in violation of state law. And I wish prosecutors in states all across the country would step up and begin protecting their citizens and the people who are not only citizens. You don't get to assault somebody because they happen to be an undocumented immigrant. You're not allowed to assault them, nor are you allowed to violate their constitutional rights, because immigrants have constitutional rights. So I don't mean to be beating up on state prosecutors, but they need to start stepping up, because if there are crimes being committed by federal agents, they need to address those crimes. But it is open season on vindictive prosecutions. We've seen it with Comey. We've seen it with Letitia James. John Bolton, it's clearly a vindictive prosecution. He may not win a motion to dismiss based on vindictive prosecution, because if the indictment is accurate, it seems like he probably, unlawfully retained classified information and disseminated it, albeit to his wife and his daughter. Looked like he was getting ready to write a book, quite frankly. That's no excuse. It's no defense, but it feels a lot like what General David Petraeus did. And I never perceived that as a political prosecution. That was just, you did something you shouldn't do, General, and you were investigated and you pleaded guilty. So Bolton may be in a slightly different category. But now it looks like they are casting a wider vindictive prosecution net, if they are willing to go after people who are peacefully protesting outside ICE facilities and they are assaulting those people, throwing them to the ground in the process. But look, there's a good bit of litigation going on in federal court in Chicago about the excessive and abusive and unconstitutional tactics by Customs and Border Patrol and ICE agents. And, there have been actually some good developments in that case.
I
There have
want to
been,
ask you,
yeah, go ahead.
but one quick thing, because something comes up all the time now, either on emails or listeners to my show. They'll ask, why don't is the immunity for federal officers like ICE and Customs Border Patrol doing their activities in the state, make them immune from prosecution for state crimes? And that's something that comes up now all the time.
Yeah.
And so can you tell people, like, where's the line? Because look, if you're a federal officer, you still have to comply with the speed limit when you come to New York City, unless you're doing some kind of work, it's a high-speed chase. You still have to live within the laws of the state you're in. But so does that mean, like, state officials should charge these guys with assault and let them invoke some kind of immunity argument in their trial, as opposed to, it seems like state officials don't want to charge them at all? Or am I missing something? I mean, you're a former federal prosecutor.
You're not missing something. If the facts support a state prosecution of a federal agent, those cases should be brought. They may not be winning cases because there are two kinds of protection that federal officers will get. One is qualified immunity. But here's the thing, Dean, and you just mentioned it. You can't be a federal officer driving drunk through the streets and kill somebody and say, I got qualified immunity. You can't be a federal officer and shoot an unarmed man in the back when he's running away. I got qualified. You can't take little Cat Obeidallah, I don't mean to call her little, but she's diminutive in stature, and throw her to the effing ground, assaulting her, and then say, yeah, but I can do whatever I want because I'm a federal agent and I have unlimited qualified immunity. No, you don't. If you're acting well outside the bounds of legitimate law enforcement activity, your qualified immunity can fall. It can evaporate. And the only way is one, prosecutors have to exercise discretion in the cases they choose to charge because the behavior is so egregious that it's outside the protection of qualified immunity. And then that gets sorted out in court. I don't want prosecutors to so edit themselves and be afraid to take difficult cases to court for fear of losing them. If it's a righteous case based on the evidence, then fight the qualified immunity battle. The other kind of protection they have is this notion of the supremacy clause in the Constitution. When you have a local law, a state law that conflicts with a federal law, and that can be extended to a local law enforcement official going after a federal law enforcement official, there will be a supremacy clause challenge mounted, which is separate to, but kind of a kissing cousin of qualified immunity. Fine, fight it out in court, right? As long as you think you've got the goods, Dean, there is no shame in losing a righteous case in court. There's nothing but shame in refusing to bring a righteous case for fear you will lose it in court. Two very different things.
I could not agree with you more. And, I had people, I was on my friend Tom Hartman's show, and others have said, well, the ICE officers have a mask on, so they don't know who they are. I'm like, that's every crime. People get robbed in Central Park. No one introduces themselves. Goes, hey, by the way, I'm John Smith. I'm going to rob you. Oh, really? That's not how it works. The police find people all the time. You know where they work. You know the shift they work. You interview their coworkers. Someone's going to give you the information you need. But I want to then now shift to what you mentioned, the good case in Chicago yesterday with Judge Sarah Ellis and Greg Bavino, who's the head of Customs. It's like his own militia he has in Chicago. I got to be honest. And I was listening to someone on MS Today say he's sort of in between command structures. Like it really is like Greg Bavino in Chicago has his own little militia unit. So share a little bit, because I know you did a whole talk on it, and this is good news for us in terms of the rule of law.
This is important news, and we should all be encouraged and inspired and motivated to get out there and, at a minimum, get your cell phone out and video any abusive conduct, any ICE or Customs and Border Patrol agent conduct you see. And here's why. Because Judge Sarah Ellis not only hauled this Gregory Bovino guy, whose title, Dean, is Border Patrol Commander at Large, which
I
sounds
know.
like something that was made up, right? She ordered him to be in her courtroom every single day for the next week. So I guess he could respond to all of these allegations that are being made and supported by both sworn affidavits from people who have witnessed it or been abused by federal officials, all of the videos. And here's the part that I think we should all hold fast to. She said part of the evidence she considered was video that was taken by the citizens of Chicago and forwarded to her chambers.
Wow.
Wow. What does that tell you? It tells you that if you are out there just not putting yourself in harm's way, you're not intervening or stepping between, law enforcement officials and the person they're trying to detain, you're just using your cell phone to video it, then you're not only posting it on social media, which I would encourage everybody to do because pressure bursts pipes and everybody needs to see this abuse for themselves. You can literally email it to the judge's chambers if there's litigation ongoing in that jurisdiction. And judges, just like Sarah Ellis, may say, I've used that as part of the evidence to reach my decision that I have to put a stop to this and I have to protect the American people because their rights are being violated. Man, if that doesn't empower and encourage us to get out and participate and engage, I don't know what will.
Yeah, and it was interesting. The judge pointed out that they had video of the ICE officers throwing tear gas at Halloween trick-or-treaters. And she told them point blank that people are going out trick-or-treating, don't gas them. Like, this is the country we live in, where the ICE guys, they feel like they're above the law because Donald Trump is above the law, and they believe Trump will pardon them, like he pardoned the January 6th terrorists, so they can do anything they want. That is very dangerous when law enforcement or anyone with power and a gun thinks they can do anything to us and they're not going to have to answer for it. I thought it was interesting. Bovino said about the body cam, he doesn't know how to use it. And I'm like, you've been in the force federal officer for years. He didn't know that was his. It might be true. I don't know. It might be bullshit. But
well, what he said to the judge, he said 99% of the agents that are part of my unit have it, and they've been trained on it. And the judge said, "What about you?" And he said, "I don't have one, and I haven't been trained." So she said, "Well, I'm ordering you to get one and be trained by Friday. And by the way, conveniently, Friday, you'll be back in my courtroom anyway." She didn't say that last part. I added that.
right. So, and last thing, Glenn, because I don't want to go too long here, but I appreciate your time and your insight, and we all learn from you. I want to get your reaction to Tish James, the arraignment that happened, and now there's motions going to be made very soon to get it dismissed for vindictive prosecution and selective prosecution. And the bottom line is the indictment alleges she saved $50 a month. In fact, it might even be lower than that. I saw some calculation; it might be $18 a month, depending on what the way it's interpreted, and that's why they prosecute her. You're a former federal prosecutor. You ever prosecute someone over $18 a month?
Yeah, so there's a saying, they'll make a federal case out of it. I think
Right.
this is the poster child for, but here's the thing, Dean. I am not saying she engaged in bank fraud, but because it only netted her $52.70, 77 cents a month over the life of the loan, we should ignore it. I'm saying I don't think there's evidence that she committed bank fraud in the first place. There's a great deep dive piece. I want to say it was in Politico this morning about how there was this document called a second residence rider. I may have the name wrong, which actually allowed her to rent it out. But what we have heard in the reporting, Dean, is she had her niece and some other family members living in the house rent free. So she wasn't really even renting it out, even though it looks like the loan paperwork she filed allowed her to. I
Yep.
don't think there's any there, but let me just plant this seed. There was just a new ruling out in California, and there was a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who was appointed unlawfully. And the
Yes,
judge
saw
just
that.
said, you are disqualified because you were appointed unlawfully. He was appointed the same way Lindsay Halligan was appointed. And here's the thing, in that California case, it says, well, the indictments out in California may be saved. Why? Because prosecutors other than the unlawfully appointed U.S. attorney signed it. Well, you know what I have in front of me? I have both the Comey and the James indictments. Guess who is the only person who signed both of those? somebody who may have been unlawfully appointed to the position of U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, which would mean bye-bye to these indictments, even before we get to vindictive and selective prosecution, and long before we ever get to a case presented to a jury. This is gonna fail spectacularly on so many fronts, and Dean, that will expose Donald Trump as the paper tiger he is, because you can get all the dirty indictments you want, but you cannot successfully prosecute these people, and that will make Donald Trump weaker over time.
And if I remember correctly, the Comey charge was right on the edge of the statute of limitations. So if you dismiss this, that could be the end of the case for him. And you remember with the Elaine Cannon in Donald Trump's documents case, she made a ruling that Jack Smith was not validly appointed, and that pushed everything away. And then the Supreme Court protected him, and that was the end of it. So we didn't get into it. I hope that in the case of Comey and Tish James, that this ends quicker. And then it goes to your very point. It makes people less and less fearful of Donald Trump's prosecutions as we're seeing it play out. So before I let you go, Glenn, where do you want them to follow you? It's Justice Matters on YouTube. I know that. Where else? What else you got going on?
Don't worry about following me. Instead, let me just say, and we also got the Ninth Circuit, which just granted en banc full bench review, and it looks like they may permanently put a stop to Donald Trump trying to deploy soldiers to the streets of Portland. So we've had a lot of good legal developments over the last 24 hours. People can find me on Substack. They're already here. Come to our community meetings, 8 or 8:30 p.m. Eastern time at night. We all get on there. We talk about the legal issues of the day. We look for the points of light, and it is community in the true sense. And that's what we need right now, is community, because we're all in this mess together, and that's the way we're going to win it together. So come join me.
And thank everyone. I hope I just wrote an article for Substack. It just went up about the need for Democrats in 2028 to make reforming this corrupt Supreme Court one of the top priorities and not give up on it, because we've had the shadow docket used in an abusive way in this Trump regime in 10 months. If you want to check it out there, they can check it out there. But Glenn, thank you very much for being on. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Glenn's friends, my friends, everyone else, I really appreciate it. I look forward to chatting with everyone and you, Glenn, in the future.
Great seeing you, Dean.
Take care, everyone.